The question cut through the cold morning air with a sincerity no one expected. "Why not give up, sir?" The young Navy SEAL candidate, barely past 20, stood trembling not from fear of punishment, but from something deeper, the kind of exhaustion that bends a man's spine and tests whatever remains inside him. The instructors paused, the ocean's roar behind them freezing into a strange stillness, as if even the waves waited for the answer. And the old SEAL, the one whose presence seemed carved from the salt water and the years, turned slowly to face the young man. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't smile. He simply looked at him with a truth so heavy that the entire group unconsciously leaned closer, because the title wasn't just a question, it was a wound, a plea, a confession. And the answer, which none of them were ready for, would decide who stayed, who quit, and who discovered a reason to keep walking on shattered feet toward something only a few men ever reach. Why not give up? The old SEAL inhaled, calm and deliberate, as if dragging memories back from a place he had buried them. And in that moment, everyone around him knew whatever he was about to say. It wasn't a lesson from a manual. It was something he had paid for with blood, ghosts, and nights to long for words. He took a step closer to the exhausted candidate. "Son," he said with a voice deep enough to steady the wind, "if you understood the cost of giving up, you wouldn't ask me that." The recruits felt something shift in the era promise, that by the end of his story, quitting would look far more painful than enduring. The old SEAL did not speak like an instructor. He spoke like a man who had stood in the doorway between life and death long enough to understand both. And as he began, the young SEAL candidates realized the real test was no longer the cold, the sand, or the endless days. It was whether they could absorb the truth of a man who had already lived through everything they feared. He walked past the rows of exhausted candidates, boots sinking into wet sand, and began a story none of them were prepared for. "I'll tell you something nobody told me," he said. "Giving up doesn't make the pain smaller. It makes you..." His tone remained controlled, factual, but loaded. Each word carried the weight of years. "You think quitting buys you rest? No. It buys regret. And regret is the only weight you carry for the rest of your life." The candidates leaned in. Even those who had secretly planned to ring the bell later felt a tension pulsing through their resolve. The old SEAL continued. "Pain ends. Exhaustion ends. Cold ends. Hell Week ends. But quitting becomes a ghost that follows you home, sits at your table, sleeps in your bed, and whispers every night, 'You could have been more.'" He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. His calmness made his words land deeper, almost surgical in the way they opened old wounds inside. Each trainee, "You asked me why not give up," he said. "Let me take you back to the day I wanted to." He paused, eyes drifting to the horizon, not escaping, but remembering. It was Afghanistan. A valley, thin air, cold enough to crack your bones. We were outnumbered, low on ammo, and one of my teammates was hit badly. I remember looking at him. His name was Eliand, thinking, "We're not getting out of here." And for a moment, just a moment, I thought about dropping my pack and letting the mountain take me. No sound, no breath, not even the gulls dared interrupt. But Eli couldn't walk. He continued quietly. So quitting wasn't a choice, because quitting would have meant leaving him to die alone. And that, he shook his head, "that's something I couldn't live with." The young SEAL who had asked the question swallowed hard. The old SEAL noticed and placed a hand on the student's shoulder, not gently, not harshly, but with the unmistakable weight of someone passing on a truth that had kept men alive. "You're not just fighting for you," he said. "You're fighting for the man next to you, for the man you will become, and for all the people who will benefit from the version of you that didn't quit." The recruits felt it, the shift, the internal earthquake. For the first time, the idea of not giving up wasn't tied to pride or toughness. It was tied to meaning, legacy, responsibility. "But here's the part they never tell you," the old SEAL added, voice dropping softer. "Discipline isn't built when you're strong. It's built when you can't lift your head, but still look forward. When your muscles shake, your feet bleed, your lungs burn, and you still take that next step." He stared into the young man's eyes. "I'm still here." Silence. A powerful, heavy silence that pressed into everyone's chest. "And when you're still here," he said slowly, "the world can't break you. One of the recruits blinked back tears quietly, hoping no one noticed. But the old SEAL saw everything. He respected it. Because tears weren't weakness in this place. They were honesty. And honesty made better warriors than pride ever would. You think giving up makes you safe, he said. But the truth is, the moment you quit here, you start quitting everywhere. First, in training, then in life, then in relationships, then in moments when people need you. Giving up becomes a habit, and habits become identity. He pointed at the line of trainees. You are not here to build a body. Anyone can build a body. You're here to build a mind that refuses to die, even when the body wants to. The wind shifted again, this time warmer, a strange comfort. And one more thing, he said, lowering his voice. There will be people in your life, family, friends, the world who will expect you to give up, not because they want you to fail, but because it makes them feel less guilty about giving up themselves. He looked around, ensuring every man heard him. Don't ever become smaller to make someone else comfortable. Another pause. He let the words sink in, like water soaking into stone. The young man who originally asked the question felt something rise inside him, not pride, not adrenaline, but something heavier, more grounded, a reason, a truth, a mission. The old SEAL stepped back and concluded the first part of his answer with a quiet, devastating clarity. You asked why not give up, he said. Here's your answer. Because the man you become after refusing to quit even once is a man you'll respect for the rest of your life. He motioned toward the ocean. And now, he added, calm and absolute, we keep going. The recruits stood taller, not because they were ordered to, but because something inside them had shifted. The question had been asked, the answer had begun. But the old SEAL wasn't finished, not even close. What he was about to reveal next, the part he had never shared publicly, would strike deeper than any training drill. He paused for a moment, just long enough to let the silence settle over the room like dust floating in a single beam of light. The young Navy SEAL, who had asked the question earlier, why not give up, sir, was still sitting forward, elbows on his knees, waiting for an answer he couldn't predict. The recruits had heard dozens of motivational speeches before, but this wasn't that. This was personal. You could feel it in the air, a heaviness that made every breath feel slightly slower. Murphy leaned back against the metal desk behind him, the wood groaning softly under his weight. His hands, scarred in a way that only someone who had lived through violence could carry, rested on the table, as if grounding himself for whatever he was about to share. You could see in his eyes that this wasn't a story he told often, maybe never. Maybe this was one of the few moments where the past forces its way into the present, and no amount of discipline can hold it back. Look, he said quietly, his voice lower now. Before we talk about not giving up, you need to understand something. Most people think discipline is what keeps a man moving forward. It isn't. Discipline fails. Motivation dies. Strength breaks. Pain wins. All of that collapses eventually. So if you don't have something deeper, something older, something primitive that refuses to die, you will quit. Everyone quits when all they have is discipline. A few recruits swallowed audibly. Others shifted, uncomfortable not because of what he said, but because of how much truth was hidden inside it. Murphy continued. When I was younger, before the uniform, before the trident, I thought pain was the enemy. I thought hardship was something to survive and forget. But I was wrong. Pain is a teacher. And hardship, he paused, searching for the right words. Hardship is a forge. It burns away the parts of you that are soft, weak, or temporary. What's left if you don't run? If you don't break is the part of you that can carry a teammate through hell. One of the recruits raised his hand slightly, as if unsure whether this moment allowed questions. Murphy nodded. But sir, what made you not give up? It was the question he had been circling around, and everyone knew it. Murphy's jaw tightened for a moment. He wasn't speaking as an instructor anymore. He wasn't even speaking as a SEAL. He spoke as a man who had faced something that changed him. There was a night, he began slowly, long before I had any medals, long before the world expected anything from me, when I was alone in the water, middle of the ocean. No moon, no stars, just black waves hitting my face. Every breath tasted like the ocean trying to take me with it. I lost sight of my team for a moment, and that moment felt like an eternity. No one moved. He went on, My legs cramped, my arms burned, and for the first time, I felt the thought creeping in. Maybe this is it. Not in a dramatic way, not in fear, just a quiet voice saying, "Let go." And I swear to you, that's the most dangerous voice a man will ever hear. He looked at the recruits, not over them, but through them, as if trying to make sure they felt the weight of those words. That voice doesn't scream. It doesn't argue. It whispers, soft enough that you almost believe it's your own voice. After enough pain, enough cold, enough time alone with your thoughts, that whisper sounds like logic, sounds like relief. One of the younger recruits, barely 18, still too small for the uniform, pulled his arms in closer, as if the cold from Murphy's memory had reached him. Murphy exhaled. But here's the thing. In that water, I remembered something my dad told me before he died. He said, "Strength isn't in the man who fights. Strength is in the man who refuses to disappear." And in that moment, when the ocean was trying to take me, when everything burned, I realized something. I wasn't fighting to live. I was fighting not to disappear, not to become a story someone else told at a funeral, not to let the world fold over me like I never existed. He took a step forward, pointing at no one and at everyone at the same time. So when you ask, why not give up? Understand this. You give up when you believe your life belongs only to you. But the moment you realize that your existence is tied to every man next to you, every family waiting at home, every person who believes you can be something more, giving up stops being an option. A quiet breath flowed across the room, dozens of lungs exhaling at the same time. Murphy wasn't finished. Some of you think you're here to prove you're strong. Some of you think you're here because you want glory. And some of you are here because you're running from something: pain, failure, childhood, a mistake, a fear. Doesn't matter. I'll tell you what I learned. You don't beat the things you run from. You beat them when you stop, turn around, look them in the eye, and say, "You don't decide who I am." He pointed toward the doors. You want to walk out when training breaks your body? Fine. The world is full of men who gave up when it got hard. You'll fit right in. But if you stave, you choose not to disappear, then one day you'll understand that courage isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the choice to stand back up no matter how much everything inside you begs to stay down. A silence followed, deep and heavy, the kind that pulls people inward, forcing them to examine the parts of themselves they usually avoid. And then Murphy said something softer, almost gentle. "The truth is, I've wanted to give up more times than I can count. But every time I felt that whisper telling me to quit, I remembered faces of teammates who didn't get to come home. And I realized, if I'm still breathing, I don't get to waste the air." The recruits didn't blink. No one moved. The air felt thick, like someone had turned gravity up a little. Murphy reached for his canteen, took a slow sip, and looked back at them with the expression of a man who had lived long enough to understand what real strength meant. "So ask me again," he said softly, almost a whisper now. "Why not give up?" No one dared to speak. The room held its breath. Murphy's answer came like a blade sliding quietly from its sheath. "Because giving up would mean admitting the world broke me, and I refuse to let it have that victory." He didn't answer immediately. He just kept walking, boots crushing wet pine needles, the fog wrapping around him like an old memory he didn't entirely trust. The SEAL recruit trailing behind him finally realized what was happening. The silence wasn't hesitation. It was discipline. It was calculation. It was a man choosing his words the same way he once chose his targets, with precision, intent, and moral weight. "You want to know why I didn't give up?" he finally said, not turning, not slowing. "Then you need to understand what giving up actually means." They walked deeper into the training woods, the air colder, the trees narrowing into a long natural corridor. Every footstep echoed like a heartbeat under pressure. "In war," he continued, "men don't give up because they're weak. They give up because something inside them stopped believing there was anything left worth fighting for. It's not about strength. It's about meaning." The recruit listened closely, breath shaky, feeling like he had stepped into a lesson no textbook or instructor could ever offer. This wasn't curriculum, it was confession. And confessions in the military were rare, sacred, and often painfully earned. The veteran finally stopped. Slowly, He sat on a fallen log, hands resting over his knees. His posture was strong, but his eyes told a story carved by years of carrying, memories too heavy to share casually. He wasn't old, he was weathered. He wasn't worn, he was shaped. There's a difference, and every SEAL knows it. Sit, he said. The recruit obeyed instantly. The older SEAL stared at the ground for a moment before speaking again. You asked, why not give up? Like the answer is some motivational quote or a story about bravery. He shook his head. It's not. The truth is uglier and heavier. A long silence. Then, I didn't give up because someone was waiting. The recruit blinked, surprised. He expected something fierce, something heroic. But the man's voice softened, and that made it more powerful. You think courage means doing impossible things, the veteran said. It doesn't. Courage means dragging your broken body, your fear, your doubt, your guilt, your exhaustion, through hell. Because you know someone out there believes you can make it back. He looked up at the recruit. That someone might be your mother, your brother, your daughter, your best friend. It might be your team, or it might just be someone whose name you'll never know. But you know they're counting on you anyway. The recruit swallowed hard. The veteran continued. On my worst day, and I've had some bad ones, I remembered one thing. Quitting isn't neutral. Quitting costs lives. And if someone out there was going to die because I decided life got too hard, then I could not, would not, allow myself to stop. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Pain. He shrugged. Pain is loud, but it's honest. It tells you you're still alive. But hopelessness, that's silent. And that's the enemy you must never let win. The recruit felt something shifting inside him. A realization that becoming a SEAL wasn't about being strong. It was about becoming responsible for lives you might never meet, futures you might never see. The veteran breathed deeply, his voice lowering. You want to hear something they don't put in the manuals? Every operator, every single one, thinks about quitting. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying. The question isn't whether you think about quitting. The question is whether you let that thought become a decision. He paused, and I decided that as long as someone out there needed me, even if I didn't know who, I had no right to give up. Wind rustled through the trees. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, listening. The recruit whispered, Sir, how did you keep going when it felt impossible? The veteran smiled sadly, like someone who had lived inside that question for decades. I didn't fight for myself, he said. The body breaks. The mind fractures. The soul gets tired. But purpose doesn't die unless you let it. He tapped his chest. My purpose wasn't glory, or medals, or stories. My purpose was simple. If I stop, someone else suffers. If I keep going, someone else lives. That was enough. He lifted his head, eyes steady, clear, alive. And one more thing, he added. You don't survive hell by being fearless. You survive hell by being anchored. And my anchor was one sentence I repeated every single time. The world went dark. The recruit leaned in, heart racing. What sentence, sir? The veteran looked him directly in the eyes. Not today. Those two words hit harder than any speech. They weren't motivational. They were survival. They were a promise a man makes to himself when everything else collapses. The veteran stood, slowly, joints cracking in the cold. That's why I didn't give up, he said quietly. Because every time the world tried to end me, I answered the same way. He whispered, Not today. The recruit felt chills race down his spine. He wasn't looking at a man anymore. He was looking at a living definition of resilience, a living refusal, a living promise. The veteran's gaze softened. But this isn't about me, he said. It's about you. Why won't you give up? Because if you don't have a reason yet, you're going to find one. And when you do, it will be the only thing that saves you. He stepped closer. Remember this. You don't choose the day you become a SEAL. The day chooses you. And it always begins the same way, with a moment where everything in you screams to stop. And you don't. He walked past the recruit, patting his shoulder gently. That's the moment that changes your life. Not the victories, not the missions. That moment. The recruit turned to watch him walk away. Sir, he called. The veteran stopped. Thank you. A long, heavy silence filled the woods. Then, without turning, the veteran answered, Don't thank me. Live like the answer deserved to be heard. And he kept walking. disappearing slowly into the fog, as if returning to the shadows he once had to survive. He paused for a long moment before answering the young SEAL's question, long enough that the night air settled around them like a heavy blanket. The stars above the training compound flickered, and a distant generator hummed like a heartbeat buried under steel. The young operator waited, chest rising slowly, unsure if he had pushed too far by asking why. Their instructor never gave up, not even when the rest of them felt their own limits closing in like walls. Finally, the older SEAL sat down on the wooden step outside the armory, elbows resting on his knees, eyes drifting to the horizon. The recruits expected a tactical lecture, something about discipline or duty, but the expression on his face warned them this answer came from a deeper place. He breathed out slowly, as if releasing a memory he rarely allowed to surface, and he began speaking in a low, steady voice, one shaped by years of endurance and losses that no manual could ever prepare a man for. He told them that giving up wasn't something he simply avoided, it was something life had tried to force on him, over and over again. But every time he faced that edge, something inside him refused to break. Not because he was stronger than other men, he said, but because he had learned that strength doesn't always look like power. Sometimes it looks like fear held in check by purpose. Sometimes it looks like pain reshaped into direction. Sometimes it looks like a promise, whispered at the darkest moment and honored in silence, when no one is watching. They listened as he described the moment years earlier, when he had come closest to quitting. Not in combat, not under fire, but during a night training run, when exhaustion blurred his vision and a weight he couldn't name settled onto his shoulders. His body was done, fully done, and he had sat on the ground with trembling hands, realizing he was seconds away from stepping out of the path he had been fighting for. No one else had been there, no teammates to motivate him, no instructors shouting, no pressure beyond his own doubt. And in that darkness, he said, he had felt smaller than he ever thought possible. But then he remembered someone waiting for him back home, someone who believed he could be more than the world expected. And he understood, in that fragile instant, that giving up wouldn't just change his life, it would rewrite the meaning of every sacrifice behind him. So he got back up, not because he felt strong, but because he chose not to let weakness become the final decision. He told the recruits that giving up often disguises itself as relief, as a quick escape from discomfort, but that comfort can also become its own form of prison, if you let it. The human mind, he explained, tries to protect you by convincing you that stopping is safer than pushing through the unknown. But growth lives in that unknown. Honor lives there. And the version of yourself you haven't met yet, the one capable of more than you imagine, waits past the point where most people stop. He said that every time he crossed that line, every time he pushed past pain, doubt, or fear, he wasn't just proving something to the Navy or to the instructors. He was proving something to himself, that he could trust his own courage, that he could depend on his own commitment, that when the world stormed against him, he would not collapse inward. His voice deepened when he spoke of the brothers he had lost, not with graphic detail, but with quiet gravity, the kind that carried weight beyond words. He said that giving up would be like erasing their names, dishonoring their memory, not because they demanded anything from him, but because he felt responsible to carry forward the meaning of their lives. That meaning lived in every mission he completed, every trainee he guided, every choice he made to stand instead of fold. The recruits understood then that his refusal to give up wasn't born from ego or necessity, it was born from the love he carried for those who no longer could continue the fight. It was born from a promise he had made long ago, to live fully enough for all of them. He shifted his gaze toward the young SEAL, who had asked the question and told him that the real reason he never gave up was far simpler than all the stories and all the memories. He said that, at the core, he believed every man gets one chance, one life to decide what he stands for, and once he made the decision to stand for something greater than himself, quitting stopped being an option. Not because he loved hardship, but because he respected the man he wanted to become. And once you meet that version of yourself, he said softly, you can't betray him. The recruits stayed silent, letting the message settle into them like an anchor dropping into deep water. The older SEAL continued, explaining that most people misunderstand strength, assuming it is the absence of vulnerability. But true strength is built on vulnerability accepted and transformed, on admitting fear but not bowing to it, on acknowledging doubt but not letting it steer the wheel. He told them that a warrior wasn't someone who felt no fear. A warrior was someone who knew exactly how heavy fear felt, and moved anyway. And that, moving forward, step by step, especially when the world inside you is collapsing, is the purest form of courage a person can show. He leaned back slightly, stretching his legs, and the recruits noticed how his hands trembled just a little, not from weakness, but from the weight of what he had shared. He told them that giving up had tried to catch him many times since that night, in small moments and big ones, and that each time he felt its pull. He asked himself a single question: who will suffer if I quit right now? He said that answer always brought him back, not with guilt, but with clarity, because he knew that his choices echo beyond him, influencing everyone who looks to him for guidance or strength, and he refused to let those echoes turn into disappointment or regret. The night air cooled further, a slow breeze sweeping across the gravel yard, as he explained that the greatest battles are seal fights aren't the ones on foreign soil, but the ones no one sees, the internal fights against doubt, despair, and the voice that whispers stop. He said that voice never disappears completely. It only grows weaker if you prove it wrong again and again. And the day you stop challenging it is the day it takes control. He warned them gently that every man faces that test eventually, and when the moment arrives, no instructor, no teammate, no manual can make the choice for you. You face it alone, and you win or lose based on the strength of your purpose. He ended by telling them that purpose was the one thing that could not be taken from a man, only surrendered. And he had promised himself a long time ago that he would never surrender it. Not to exhaustion, not to fear, not to grief. That was why he never gave up. Not because he was unbreakable, but because he had decided, long ago, that breaking would not be the end of his story. The silence that followed was deep, reverent, almost sacred, as if the night itself understood the weight of his confession. None of the young SEALs moved, afraid that breaking the moment would somehow diminish what they had just heard. When he finally rose to his feet, the recruits rose with him, not out of obligation, but out of respect. And as he dismissed them for the night, they walked away differently than they had arrived, carrying not just the lesson he had spoken, but the truth he had lived. They would never forget it, neither would he. The room was quieter now. The projector was off, the fluorescent lights humming softly above, and the air smelled faintly of sweat, dust, and the metallic echo of spent adrenaline. Boots that had been tapping nervously hours earlier were now still. Pens that had scribbled frantic notes lay forgotten on open notebooks. The recruits sat there, shoulders heavy, eyes red but wide awake, as if they were afraid that blinking meant missing something. The older Navy SEAL stood in front of them, hands resting on the back of a metal chair, knuckles scarred, veins raised like small rivers, under skin burned by years of sun and salt water. His uniform looked simple, almost ordinary. What was not ordinary were the details they could not ignore. Now, the faded unit patches, the slight limp in his step, the way he scanned exits without thinking about it, and the quiet gravity in his eyes that no training manual could ever teach. He had already spoken of missions that went wrong, of nights where the only light was tracer fire and the glow of burning vehicles, of friends whose names were now carved into cold stone. He had spoken of fear without shame, of panic without judgment, of the million small decisions that separate a survivor from a memory. He had warned them that Hollywood lied, that real courage was not a slow-motion charge into danger, but the choice to go forward when every cell in your body begged you to run. One recruit, at the end of the third row, shifted in his seat. His hands were trembling, but not from exhaustion. It was something deeper, a question that had been growing quietly inside him from the first minute of training, a question that late-night motivational videos could not answer, that family members back home could not understand, and that he was almost ashamed to say aloud. He swallowed hard. "Sir," he said, voice cracking slightly. The older SEAL looked up, eyes sharp but patient. "Yeah, go ahead." The recruit's throat felt dry. He forced the words out anyway. Why not give up, sir? The room reacted like someone had opened a window in a storm. A few recruits looked at him in disbelief, as if he'd broken some unspoken rule. Others looked down, because they had been asking themselves the same thing in secret and didn't have the courage to say it. A couple of them held their breath, waiting to see if the instructor would snap, mock, or crush him with some brutal answer. But the older SEAL didn't explode. He didn't laugh. He didn't turn the question into a motivational slogan. Instead, he stared at the young man for a long, uncomfortable moment, like he was examining not just his face, but the weight behind the question. Then he pulled the metal chair out, turned it around, and sat down on it, facing the recruits as if they were all suddenly much closer. That, he said quietly, is the only real question in this room. No one moved. The fans in the corner clicked as they rotated. Outside, boots passed in the hallway. Someone coughed and quickly stopped. The older SEAL leaned forward, elbows on his knees, fingers interlaced. You think this is about being tough, he began. About proving you're harder than the next guy, pushing through more pain, running farther, carrying more weight. And yeah, that's part of the job. But the reason you don't give up, he shook his head slowly. It's not about ego. It's not about your image. It's not about the trident you want on your chest. It's about what happens if you quit. And what that does to more than just you. He paused to let that land, eyes moving from face to face. Most of you think quitting is a moment, he continued. A single event. You imagine some dramatic scene, ringing the bell, dropping your gear, walking away. But that's not how it works. Quitting is a habit you quietly build when no one's watching. You start by giving up on the small things. You cut corners on the details. You tell yourself, it doesn't matter if I slack, just this once. You lie to yourself in whispers, and little by little, you're training your brain to obey those lies. He straightened up a little, voice still calm but sharper now. Then one night, real life comes for you. Not a drill, not a training exercise. You're out there in the dark, heart pounding, ears ringing, somebody screaming into the radio. Maybe someone you know, maybe someone calling your name. And in that moment, the version of you that you've been training is the only version of you that shows up. Not the version you like to imagine. The version you've built, rep by rep, decision by decision. In the small hours when nobody was looking, he looked back to the recruit who had asked the question. So, you're not just training your body here, he said. You're training your answer to that question long before you ever have to give it. Why not give up, sir? Because if you train yourself to give up on yourself, one day, you'll give up on someone else, and you won't be able to live with the cost of that. The recruit swallowed again, the knot tightening in his throat. The instructor's voice dropped, almost to a whisper. I had a friend, he said. We grew up in the teams together. Same jokes, same long runs, same terrible chow. We trained side by side until it almost felt like we shared the same heartbeat. He was faster than me, stronger than me, if I'm being honest. But he had one problem. He held up a single finger. He kept quitting on himself in the quiet things. The room leaned in without realizing it. He'd cut 5 seconds off a drill because no one will notice, skip the extra reps if his body hurt. Tell himself he'd make up for it later. And on paper, everything looked fine. On the scoreboard, on the tests, on the evaluations he passed. But inside, he was building a habit, not of failing, but of surrendering early. Surrendering when things look as... He stared at the floor for a moment, remembering. Years later, we rolled out on a mission. Bad place, bad timing, bad intel. We got hit harder than we expected. Dust everywhere, radios screaming, rounds hitting dirt close enough to taste. One of our guys got pinned behind a low wall, out in the open, bleeding, weapon jammed, losing strength. I saw my friend's eyes meet mine for a split second, through the dust. The instructor's jaw tightened, and in that half second, he said, I saw a man fighting, not just the enemy in front of him, but the weaker version of himself he'd been rehearsing for years. The part of him that said, you're tired, you're scared, you did enough, someone else will handle it. He's quiet for a long moment. No one in the room dares to move. He didn't give up, the instructor finally said. Not that night. He pushed forward. He moved anyway. He did what needed to be done. But I saw the war inside him. And when we got home, when the noise stopped, the guilt started. Not because he failed, But because he realized how close he had come to making a decision that would have haunted him for the rest of his life, the recruit stared at him, as if trying to imagine that invisible battle inside a man who looked so unbreakable from the outside. "That's why you train like this," the older SEAL continued. "That's why little things matter. That's why quitting on a run, on an extra rep, on a cold shower, on a hard conversation, it all matters. You're teaching yourself whether your word means something, when everything is on the line, whether your promise to your team, to your family, to yourself, is real or just noise." He turned his attention back to the recruit who had asked. "You want a simple answer to why not give up, sir?" He said. "Here it is." He held up his hand, counting off each point with a finger. "First, because someone out there is counting on you, and they don't know it yet. It might be the teammate next to you. It might be a stranger you've never met. It might be your own kid, 10 years from now, asking you who you were when things got hard. Second, because one day you'll look in the mirror and you'll have to live with the truth of whether you stood up or walked away. And no medal, no rank, no excuse will erase that. Third, because when you refuse to quit, doesn't matter if you finish first or last, something inside you changes. You stop being just a body in uniform. You become reliable. And in this world, reliable men are rare and priceless." His gaze softened just a little. "And fourth," he added, "because one day, you'll be the one sitting in this chair, and some 20-year-old kid will look at you with fear in his eyes and ask the same question. And your answer shouldn't be theory. It should be a life you actually lived." Silence folded over the room again, heavier and more meaningful this time. The recruit who asked the question felt something shift inside his chest. It wasn't a sudden explosion of confidence. It was quieter, deeper, like a knot being untied slowly. He thought of all the nights he had sat on his bunk, wondering if he was cut out for this, considering whether to write the email home and say, "I tried, but it wasn't for me." He thought of the people who believed in him. He thought of the version of himself 10 years from now, answering a child's question at the dinner table. The instructor took a slow breath. "You don't have to be fearless," he said. "You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be the strongest man in the room. You just have to be the one who decides, again and again, I will not abandon the people who are counting on me. I will not abandon the man I said I wanted to become." That's it. That's the whole thing. He stood up, the chair scraping softly against the floor. "And understand something," he added, voice firmer now. "This isn't just about war. It's not just about uniforms or flags or missions. Life will come for you in ways that have nothing to do with bullets, a phone call in the middle of the night, a diagnosis, a loss that rips the ground out from under your feet. On those days, you'll hear the old question again. Why not give up? And the work you're doing here, the mind you're building here, that's what will answer for you when you can't think straight." He stepped back, hands behind his back. "I'm not here to convince you to stay," he said. "You can quit, right now. That door is open. Nobody's going to drag you back to your seat. But understand the easiest decision today might become the weight you carry for the rest of your life. Or, the hardest decision today might be the one that keeps you standing when everyone else falls apart. That's the deal." The room felt even smaller now, as if the walls had moved in closer. The older SEAL checked his watch, more out of habit than necessity. Then he nodded once. "That's all I've got for you," he said. Class dismissed. No one moved. He took a step toward the door, then stopped, as if remembering something. Without turning around, he spoke one last time, quieter, but somehow more powerful than anything he had said before. "One more thing," he murmured. "You all keep waiting for some big, cinematic moment where you'll prove you're warriors. That's not how it works. You don't become that man in one night. You become him in 1,000 tiny moments when no one is clapping. Every time you choose not to give up on the run, on the cold, on the fear, on yourself, you're building a voice inside you that will answer when the world asks, 'Who are you, really?' Make sure you like that answer." This time, when he reached the door, he opened it and walked out without looking back. The recruits stayed seated. No one joked. No one complained. The usual rush to escape the classroom never came. Instead, one by one, they packed their notebooks slowly, as if each movement was part of a decision they were still processing. The recruit who had asked the question remained in his chair, staring at the spot where the instructor had been. His thoughts were loud, but his body felt strangely calm. The question hadn't become easier, but it had become clearer. He stood up last. As he stepped into the hallway, the sounds of the bass returned, boots on concrete. Commands shouted in the distance, the clatter of metal. Life moved forward, indifferent as always, but something was different now. Not out there, inside. He walked toward the barracks with a new kind of tiredness, heavy but honest. He knew there would be days ahead when the old doubt would return, whispering that he wasn't enough, that quitting would be simpler, quieter, less painful. He also knew that the answer he'd heard today was no longer just a speech. It was a mirror. Why not give up, sir? He heard the echo of the instructor's voice in his mind, steady and unhurried. Because someone is counting on you. Because you have to live with yourself. Because you've come too far to abandon who you're becoming. Because quitting is louder in your soul than any silence. Outside, he reached for the door to his room, hand pausing on the handle for a heartbeat. There were no cameras, no applause, no dramatic music, just a young man in a silent hallway, deciding quietly and completely that the next time his mind asked him to give up, his answer would be different. He opened the door and stepped inside. No speech, no final quote, no grand gesture. Just the kind of silence that comes right before life truly begins to change.